Good morning, boys and girls. Welcome to Sunday School. And you probably say, like last week, Miss Beth, where are you? That is not the room of Hope Baptist Church's Sunday School class. Well, this week I am with my son Caleb, and so I'm actually recording this lesson in one of their Sunday School rooms. And hopefully next Sunday I will be back in Hope Baptist Church's Sunday School room. I'm looking forward to being back in Ireland, and hopefully I can see some of you or all of you very soon. Now, who can remember the memory verse from last week? Remember, I was sitting by the seashore and I was talking about those mighty waves. Do you know it? Psalm chapter 93, verse 4. The Lord on high is mightier than the noise of many waters, yea, than the mighty waves of the sea. Well, I hope you were able to work on that this week and to memorize that and to remember how mighty our God is and that He can meet your needs no matter what they are, no matter how big or how small. God can always meet your need. Well, I want to start this week's lesson with a song. And I don't know if you know this song or not, but it goes perfectly with the lesson that I'm going to teach today. I have to remember it myself. Let's see. 12 men went to spy on Canaan, 10 were bad and 2 were good. What do you think they saw in Canaan? 10 were bad and 2 were good. Some saw oh, I'm sorry, I forgot it. Okay, sorry. Miss Beth really messed up, didn't she? I forgot the song in the middle of the song. I am really, really sorry. Okay, we will come back to that. I want to talk about 12 men who went to spy on Canaan. 10 were good, 10 were bad, and 2 were good. Now, what do we mean by that? That's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to be talking about the children of Israel and their traveling in the desert. Remember, they were in the land of Egypt. They had been slaves there for many, many years. And they prayed to God and they cried, asking God to deliver them from that slavery. And God sent them the man Moses to lead them out of Egypt. And Egypt was not a good place for them. Moses came. Now, did Moses lead them out because he was amazing and he had great strength and power? No, he didn't. He came and led them out because God always uses a man to do His work. But Moses depended on God's power and God's ways as he did what God wanted him to do to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt. Remember, they had those plagues. The water turned to blood. They had flies, so many flies. They were everywhere, inside and outside. Could Moses do that? No. And then they had the frogs that were everywhere in your bed. When you opened, well, they didn't have refrigerators, but if they did, if they opened the refrigerator, there would have been frogs there. Everywhere they went, there were frogs. Could Moses make all those frogs? No, but God could. And he turned the dust into lice. Could Moses do that? No, but God can. And God used Moses to be the leader. And after each one of those plagues, it was to hopefully bring Pharaoh to the point where he'd say, okay, you guys can leave. But each time he hardened his heart and said no, until the very last one, which was the death of the firstborn in every house, unless they followed God's provision for salvation of that firstborn. And that was to kill a lamb, take its blood, put it on the top of the door and on each side of the door. And when the death angel of God came and he saw the blood, he would Passover. No death in that house. And they still celebrate that today in Israel with the Feast of the Passover. And it was terrible. The Egyptians didn't believe God, and so they didn't do it. They didn't follow God's provision, and there was death in every house, even the Pharaoh's house in Egypt. And so they said, "Get out, go, 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 leave quickly." And so the Israelites, remember, they were told to eat that feast with their shoes on, their coats on, so they would be ready to travel. And they left. And when they left, the pillar of cloud led them. That was God. And at nighttime, it was a pillar of fire. And God led them right to a place called the Red Sea. But meanwhile, Pharaoh, he was sorry that he had let them go. So he got his soldiers all together, got them with their horses and their chariots, and they chased after the Israelites. The Israelites turned and looked behind them. They couldn't go back. They were scared. Here comes the mighty army of Pharaoh. They couldn't go forward because the Red Sea was in front of them. But God is still mighty, isn't he? That wasn't a problem for God. He parted the waters and they crossed over the Red Sea, not in sticky mud, but on dry ground. And they all got across. And then the Israelites decided they would go across too. But when they got into the middle, God told Moses, "Hold out your rod." He did. And God brought the mighty waters of the Red Sea crashing down upon them, destroying Pharaoh's army. Pharaoh's army would never, ever again chase them or bring them back to Egypt. And God did many other things after that for them. And he provided water out of a rock. He provided manna for them. Wow. If God did all of those things, wouldn't you think that they would absolutely trust everything that God said? You would think so, wouldn't you? And we'd like to think we would. But you know what? They came to a place called Kadesh Barnea. And they wanted to know what the land of promise, the promised land, the land of Canaan was like. And so they asked Moses, "Can we not send some men ahead and see what the land looks like?" And Moses talked to God, and God said, well, they should know already and trust me. They know it's a good place because I've said it's a good place. But go ahead, choose one man from every tribe. Now they had 12 tribes in the nation of Israel. So Moses chose one man from each tribe, 12 different men. 2 of those men we know were very good men. The 2 were good. One of them was Joshua, Moses' assistant. The other man's name was Caleb, and he was a mighty man of faith. They both trusted God with their whole heart. Well, the other 10 went with Joshua and Caleb into the land of promise. They were supposed to look and see what the land was like, how big it was. They were to go from north to south, from east to west, look over the whole thing, and come back and give a report to the people what it was like. Well, all the other people were to stay there. Oh, they were so excited. You can see the kids running around. The ladies were still doing the work. And they would talk about this land. They couldn't wait to hear what it was like. They had been told it was a land flowing with milk and honey. And the kids thought, wow, that would be great. They could have as much milk to drink as they wanted, and as much honey to eat as they wanted. Now that may not sound that good to you, but they didn't have Coke and Fanta and Club Orange, those kind of things to drink. They had water or milk. So which would you rather have? milk, of course. So they thought this was wonderful. And then honey, well, honey was sweet. Honey was good. Remember, they had just come out of Egypt where they were slaves. Do you think slaves eat very many sweets? Nope. They thought, all the sweets we could have. Oh, that'll be wonderful. And the kids were so excited. The parents were excited. And so those spies, they were gone 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. Pretty soon it was 1 week, 2 weeks. And the parents started getting concerned. Are they okay? Why haven't they come back? Did they die? Were they killed? Was it not a good land after all? Well, you know how long those spies were gone? They were gone 40 days. And finally, they came back. And when they came back, look at what they're carrying. They had some vegetables and some fruits. And look at this. That's a big bunch of grapes. It was so big and heavy that they had to put it on a pole and 2 men had to carry it. Wow, the people were so excited. This looks amazing. If this is the fruit, if this is the food that is in Canaan, it's a wonderful place. We can't wait to go. Oh, this is so exciting. And so they gathered around and they wanted to hear what those 12 men had to say about the land of Canaan. And they started telling them, look at these grapes. There's so many vineyards full of grapes. And they're big and heavy. Oh, it's wonderful. And there's pomegranates, and there's figs, and there's other fruit, and there's vegetables, and there's fields of grain. There is food everywhere. It is a very fruitful land. There will be plenty of food for us to eat. The people were excited. Remember, they've been just eating manna in the desert. And so that sounded so delicious and so wonderful that there was just so much of it. But then something began to happen. 10 of the men said, well, that's not all that we saw in Canaan. As we were going from the north to the south, from the east to the west, we saw small towns. But then we saw big, huge, fortified cities, impossible to get into. They were strong. And then you should have seen the people. They were huge. They were giants. Oh, and those 10 men were scared. And you know, because their report of giants and strong cities didn't sound positive. It wasn't positive. The people began to get a little scared. And Caleb and Joshua realized they're not remembering who God is. Our mighty God, He promised us that land. He can take care of those problems. And so Caleb, he said, let us go up right away and possess the land, for the Lord will surely give it to us. Caleb had the right idea. He knew that God had promised it. God was mighty. God could do anything. And yeah, there were problems, but let's go. God's going to help us. But the people, oh, they heard those 10 men. They kept speaking. They kept talking about the problems, the giants, the big cities. And instead of listening to Caleb and Joshua, who had faith in God, they listened to those who were full of unbelief, and they became discouraged. You know, unbelief in our heart, failing to believe God, trust God, will bring discouragement to our life too. But Caleb and Joshua, they looked to God. Yeah, they saw the same things, but they knew that God could take care of them. God had promised that land. They didn't know how God would do it, but they knew that God would keep His promise. And so, faith encouraged them. Belief and trust in God encouraged them. Well, those two men were the only ones who spoke positively. And there were 10 men that were saying, it's going to be too hard, it's too difficult. And so as the children of Israel looked, there's a big group of 10 men. And this is what they're saying. And here's just 2 men. And what they're saying is so different from the 10 men. Who should we believe? They did something that we often do. Oh, there's a lot of people saying this over here. We're going to go with them. We're going to believe them instead of the small group. That's not what they should have said, and that's not what we should say. They should have said, which one is telling us what God's word says, what God has said? Whether it's the big group or the small group, it doesn't matter. But the group that tells us what God says, they're the ones that we will believe. They're the ones that we will follow. You know, we have that choice too. Sometimes we get in a situation and the bigger group is saying things that we know God wouldn't want us to do, or to believe, or to listen to. And maybe there's only one person, or maybe it's just your mom or dad saying, no, this is what God says. And often what do? We choose to go with the crowd, with the group. And that doesn't lead us in the right direction. Just like with the children of Israel, they chose to listen to the group that was full of unbelief, no faith, and they weren't following God. They should have followed Caleb and Joshua, who were full of faith and trusting God. Well, they had a choice to make. Kadesh Barnea is a place of decision. And so they went to bed that night, and in the morning they were going to have to make a choice. Are they going to believe Joshua and Caleb, who are saying what God has to say, and follow God and do what God says? Or are they going to listen to the bigger group and go their own way? When they woke up in the morning, they were still upset. And they decided that they were going to do something different. Well, they talked about choosing a new leader. Who was the leader that God gave them? It was Moses. But Moses was trying to lead them where God wanted them to go, where the 2 spies, Joshua and Caleb, wanted to go. They didn't want to miss their leader because that's not what the big group was saying. So they were going to choose a new leader and go back to Egypt. You know what they said? It was crazy. They said it would be better to go back to Egypt, go back to where they were slaves, than to go into this land of promise, this land flowing with milk and honey, which God had promised them. That doesn't sound like they're thinking right, does it? And then they said, in fact, it would even be better for us to just die right here in the wilderness than to go into that land of promise where there are giants and those giants would kill us. It'd be better to just die right in the wilderness, right in the desert. Are they thinking straight? No, they're not. They're letting their unbelief affect their decisions instead of faith in God. Well, Caleb and Joshua, they got a little bit excited, maybe even upset, and they tried to convince the people, no, we need to listen to God. We need to follow God. We need to go into that land. God loves us, and He promised that He would give us that land. We need to follow God. But look at these people. They got angry at Joshua and Caleb because they were telling them the truth, and they didn't like what the truth was. And the Bible tells us that they wanted to stone Joshua and Caleb. And you know what Moses did? He didn't turn around and run away. He and Aaron did the right thing. They fell down on their face before God and they began to pray. And you know what God did? God spoke. And he said, how long will these people provoke me? In other words, how long are they going to continue in their unbelief? After all the miracles I have showed them, after all the ways I have provided for them, they still won't believe me and trust me? And then he said, Moses, I'm going to destroy these people, and from you, Moses, I'm going to make a new nation, and I'll give your descendants this promised land. Now, what do you think Moses would say or think? We might say, oh, great, I'd love to be the father of a new great nation. That sounds important. But Moses was not concerned about himself and how it would make him important maybe, or feel wonderful. He was more concerned about God getting glory and God getting honor. And so he prayed. He prayed for those people. They deserved punishment because they were not following God. But he said, God, remember, you brought them out of Egypt. And the Canaanites know it. The Egyptians know it. And if you were to destroy this people right now, right here, those people would not believe in you. They would think that you were not able to bring the full plan into being. In other words, you would not be able to give them what you promised them. God, your name will suffer. Your honor will suffer. Forgive these people. And you know, God heard Moses' prayer. And he said, Moses, I will forgive these people. I won't destroy them, but they will be punished. Do you remember how many days they had been away spying out the land? That's right, 40 days. And so, for every day that the spies had spied out the land, there was going to be 1 year of spending time in the desert. They were going to wander around in the desert in a hot, dry, dusty place where there's not much water and hardly any food, instead of having all that wonderful food, all those things that God had promised for them. That's terrible enough, isn't it? But God also said all of those who are adults, 20 years old and older, who saw all the miracles I've done in Egypt and since you've come out of Egypt, and they still don't believe me and don't trust me, every one of them will die and not enter into that promised land. But I will give it to their children and to the 2 spies that did believe. Caleb and Joshua would be the only adults that would be able to go in because they trusted God. Oh, how much better to trust God, to believe God, even if it's only you or maybe you and one other person. Way better to trust God and follow God. Unbelief never helps us. It always brings destruction and sad things into our life. Well, the people, they thought, what? We came out of Egypt, we've come through the wilderness, and now we don't get to go into the promised land? No, that can't be. We'll get our own soldiers, we'll get the soldiers together, and we're going to go in right now, and we'll fight those Canaanites, and we're going to win, and we're going to have the promises of God. But what had God already said? God had already said that they were not going to go in. Would God be going with them if they went against what God said? Nope. And so Moses said, he came after them and said, wait, stop. If you go, God is not going with you. God will not fight the battle for you. You will lose. They didn't listen to Moses. You should always listen to God's leader. And in our church, That's the pastor. They didn't listen to Moses, who knew what God wanted. They decided they were going to fight their battle and they would win in their own strength. But Moses was right, because that's what God said. And you know, they went to fight and they lost. And the ones that were still alive, they ran all the way back to the camp. They ran out of Canaan and they came back to the camp. There was no other choice now but to wander in the wilderness, just like God had told them would happen. Now, what can we learn from that? We can't fight the battle ourselves. We have to believe God. We have to trust God. We have maybe not giants in our life, but we have sins that we have a hard time with. How many of you sometimes struggle with being obedient to your mom all the time? That can almost be like a giant. But you know what? If you just try harder and try to do it in your own strength, you're not going to do it. But if you trust God and know, because God says that He will help you to overcome sin if you're His child, and you look to Him for the strength and the ability to have victory, God will help you. So we can learn from their example and we can make the right choices, can't we? Well, I have a verse for us today that's written up on the board, and it kind of goes along with the story, I think. The fear of man bringeth a snare. A snare is a trap. The people and those 10 spies, they feared men. They feared those giants, and they were trapped by their unbelief. And it didn't bring them good things. Whenever we fear what other people will think, and therefore we don't obey God, we're going to be sorry like them. But whoso putteth his trust in the Lord shall be saved. Just like Caleb and Joshua, they put their trust in the Lord and they were safe. They were able to go into the promised land. Say this together with me. Ready? The fear of man bringeth a snare, but whoso putteth his trust in the Lord shall be saved. Proverbs chapter 29, verse 25. All right, let's do it one more time. Ready? The fear of man bringeth a snare, but whoso putteth his trust in the Lord shall be saved. Proverbs chapter 29, verse 25. All right, Pastor and Miss Beth, we both miss you very, very much. Pray for us that we can have a safe trip back to Ireland. Hopefully we'll be back in Ireland by Friday. All right, bye-bye.